Hello, hello. Crap, did that just actually notify everyone, or was it just the people that wanted to join? I'm so good at Discord. No, this has to be a lie. Okay, hi everyone. I'm gonna grab some headphones real quick so I can hear all the wonderful things that people are saying. I still find this kind of spooky how I'm just talking into the void. No one else is. Okay, let's this look a little bit less bad. It's just gonna be me yapping. This is true. Okay. Share the screen. Yo. See that. Incredible. Okay, well, hi everybody. Thanks for joining me on this wonderful Sunday for me. It might be Monday for you, depending on where you are. And Yap number three is essentially about working with your game studio and your larger community on whatever may end up being relevant for for the wiki. And this is a bit shorter on the presentation side, but maybe going to get more into the specifics as we get into questions and discussion and stuff. Um, this is an area in general where I don't want to have grand pronouncements about what works 100% of the time for every game developer or every studio or every group of people, but the specifics matter a lot. So I'll tell you some of the things that have kind of worked for us, and then we can try and figure out how that fits into whatever your situation is. So, a high level point I want to make to you guys is that the average person actually really likes wikis. Your wiki is probably more important than you think it is in kind of the the overall community that you inhabit. In most cases, especially with video games, more so than anything else, just about everyone involved with the larger community will be regularly using the wiki, and that includes both like just the average person that is playing the game, but it also includes, honestly, probably to an even greater extent, game developers, YouTubers, other power users. I could go on. I could give you probably like 10 or 15 examples of game developers that have said, "Oh yeah, we just use the wiki for, all of our lore documentation or whatever just because it's better than what we have on our side." They might have something in Confluence or something that gives some of the information about, this is our world building or these are the mechanics for this thing. But in general, if your wiki is sufficiently good, developers will use it for a lot of things. And this creates an opportunity for you that will be slightly it's going to be a different shape depending on what you're doing and who you are, but it very much creates an opportunity and you are really really nerfing yourself and the wiki by not generally realizing this. So I'm going to go through a few different parts of this, but one thing I really want to point out to everyone is just like announce your stuff. You're there's you're once in a while going to have something that is going to be worth talking about on the internet, whether that's like a new update that you need help with or some new feature or some new initiative. There's always going to be something like for RuneScape and old school. We probably make announcements on Reddit and Twitter and stuff 10-ish times a year. And I think something to realize is that most people don't really think about the wiki as a thing made by other people unless you do announcements. Once there's like, oh, there's someone from the wiki that is commenting on this thread or like answering my question or whatever, it really kind of changes the game in terms of what other people's expectations are for how the wiki works and their ideas about, I mean, getting back into trying to get other people to edit their ideas about how. And I this is gonna undercut one of my points a little bit here, but you guys may have seen this graph that I was like parading around that shows what happens to the number of editors on a wiki after after they move away from fandom. And really there's a few different factors that play here, but one of them that I've rarely talked about, but I think is actually really important is I think a large part of why the the editor count bumps happen immediately after a fandom move is because after a fandom move is right when the community is kind of just hearing about the wiki from the editors, usually for the first time. This whatever the post is about, hey, the League of Legends wiki has left fandom. That gets, 5, 10,000 upvotes, gets way more attention than anything else that has ever been put out by a person associated with the wiki. And this is the first moment where people can be like, oh wow, this is actually a thing made up by people who also play the game, and it's not that complicated and it's not that scary. And so I think part of this bump that we have here is just because it's not fandom, but some of it is also just having announced stuff makes a pretty big difference. And I really just encourage you guys to try it. Like not every single announcement you're gonna make is gonna go crazy, but like most of them are gonna pop off. You're gonna get generally a lot more interest in it than you would otherwise expect. Although it does take a certain level of skill to write a post about this that works well. I think it requires a level of just self-awareness of understanding how people are going to perceive the things you say, understand which things people will already know and will not know. Like if you start talking some jargon immediately about um if the thing you're expecting people on, let's say, the League of Legends subreddit to read is super jargony about wiki stuff and it's not going to make sense to people who haven't been doing wiki stuff for a really long time, um and it's not gonna go very well, and it's a skill you develop of being able to put yourself in the shoes of someone who doesn't know how things work, and, yeah, Leafy says short posts are best, and this is, like, so overwhelmingly true beyond what I would have ever thought possible. Like, we started just kinda tracking sorta how well these posts did in relation to how long they were, and it is the most, like, perfect correlation you can ever find. Like if you can make a post or a comment or something that is like a couple sentences, it's going to get really popular. If you make it like 10 long paragraphs describing, in tortured detail where everything came from, that's not going to go quite as well. And I think one thing you can do though is if you can make the original post short and make any follow-up comments that are like in relation to things people have done, you can make those a little bit longer. But even then, and honestly, this isn't even about, moving away from fandom posts. This is just about like, hey, we have I'll show some examples at the end maybe, but we have a new page with this sort of information, or want help doing this search digest thing, or there's this new update that we need to cover. There's so many examples of this that the the skill you need for it is essentially the same. It's like figuring out how to convey the information you need in a really punchy, quick format. But the the message is going to be different. And I think just getting good at any of them makes all of them a lot easier. So that's what I would say. Announce your stuff. It's gonna pop off. There's, like, absolutely no reason not to. And, I'll talk a little bit about, like, sort of the coalitions you're gonna wanna form in order to make those easier, but honestly, just announce your stuff. Okay, so game studios. This is kind of an important part. I see this from here? Yes, okay. So, I think wiki people and honestly, people in video game communities in general see the people that work at these game studios as, like, God, basically. You know, they're as in the as there's some sort of hierarchy that, you are at the bottom at as a player, and you can kinda work your way up, and maybe eventually you can reach the pantheon of being, working on this game or something, and they just I think this comes mostly from a place of, uh, I don't know, when I was 11 and I was playing RuneScape, I definitely thought people that worked for Jagex, uh, were all-knowing, all-powerful people. Now some of them are very good friends of mine, and I realize that the people 20 years ago were just, um, in their early 20s and really liked drinking. They're just people. They're absolutely just people, and you're gonna get a lot further by just treating them like normal people than you will by being like, oh my god, there's the the game designer over there." And really, your game devs will almost certainly like you if you're smart about it. Um, and that mostly means, first of all, being actually genuinely friendly, being like a normal ass person. I know I know that's not the easiest thing for wiki people in general. I think wiki people get super excitable and, are on average, this is not a constant rule, but on average are less self-aware than maybe the population at large. And if you can all of a sudden be the person who can talk to these, people who are more or less your peers, honestly, they just happen to work on the game instead of on the wiki. If you can talk to them like a peer and look for areas where there's, like, room for collaboration that actually makes sense, especially, like, starting out things that are probably more beneficial to them than they are to you. Um, you can get some really good things to happen, and I'm sorta hesitant to get, like, really into the weeds about, like, this is a specific thing we did with, like, Jagex or Riot or anything, because it's gonna make it sound a lot more, like, planned and Machiavellian than it actually was. It's more just like, so RuneScape has a fan convention, I guess you'd call it, every year, called RuneFest, and literally just at the end of one of the RuneFests in 2019, we ended up, uh, at a table with 4 or 5, old school RuneScape developers. One of them I sort of very vaguely knew already, um, and it was the end of the night, everyone was kinda just tired from a long day, and I was like, "You know what? I wanna keep talking to these guys. I'm gonna keep buying drinks until they have to go." So, I went and spent probably, like, $400 on the worst, most overpriced, like, Jaeger bombs you can possibly imagine. The bartender really, really got to like me by the end of this night, but the end result was, "Oh, wow, all of a sudden, I have, like, 5 pretty good friends, uh, that work on old school RuneScape. And the next time I wanna talk about something, or I wanna be like, "Hey, how the hell does this thing actually work? Like, under the hood, the observations don't make sense. I don't get it. Like, give me a hint." Or, treating it almost as like a mystery that everyone can kind of work together on. If you can nerd snipe the designers, the developers, the community managers, anybody into caring about the same sorts of things you care about, which, by the way, is not as hard as it sounds. The point I want to make is that you're sort of your compatriots on the game studio side are sort of just you with a slightly different accent and um, slightly different goals, but aligned enough if you're smart about it that you can get some really good things to happen. And I think because most people doing wiki stuff don't have prior experience with this. And of course, like I before a certain point, I didn't have any experience with this either. We just kind of like fumbled around and figured it out. But there's often an idea that like, oh, if we want to have some relationship with the game studio, we should go top down. We're gonna like, I don't know, email a mailbox thing, or we're gonna try and go through like high level people, and then eventually that's going to reach the people that actually want to talk to us. And that just doesn't really work, I would say. I think the thing that works is finding I say low level people. Like I don't mean like the most junior people, but I mean the people actually on the ground doing stuff that is relevant to you. Find those low level in the kind of same way that like C is a programming language is low level. Find those people, and because they're the ones that are going to be most similar to you. Honestly, it's sometimes easier said than done to find them. It depends on uh the organization of the studio, it depends on the structure, it depends on whether there's been some big controversy recently that's causing everyone to sort of have their tail between their legs. Eh, and what you wanna do is find someone who wants to talk to you. And this is not the easiest thing to do because there's in any company, because like game studios ultimately they're not Valhalla, they are companies that have their own organizational dysfunctions. Um, there's gonna be people there that are a lot like you, and then there's gonna be people that really aren't like you at all and kinda don't really care and kinda just treat it as a job, and that's kind of I've seen other people get very mad about this. I think that the reality is this is just how the world works, and you can't just get super mad about the people that are not going out of their way to do stuff. You just need to work to find the people that really do give a shit because they do exist, and they are exactly the set of people that you will end up getting along with. They're also the ones that if they, play the game, or even if they don't play the game, even if they're just using it in their line of work, they're going to be the ones that are the most familiar with the wiki, going to have the most to say about it, and will see the most value in supporting it in some way. That doesn't mean they are necessarily going to have the ideas fully formed for what that would look like. That is, I think, largely your job and not their job to figure out what those things are. But ultimately, these people, I'm not gonna say they exist at every single game studio you can find. I think trying to apply this sort of playbook to, uh, Nintendo would not go very well historically. I assume some of you know about this. Nintendo has a very, very different culture, for interacting with, let's say, third party communities about their games. It's much more sort of like litigation based. Uh So I don't wanna claim that this applies without exception, but I think in many, many places it will. I mean, even something like Minecraft, I think there is room for a better relationship there, and we haven't really put the legwork into that we probably should. But, correct me if I'm wrong, the main person interacting with the Minecraft wiki from the studio side is the guy whose username is like IP enforcement something, right? Like that's so I'm not surprised that that person is telling you, don't use the artwork and the logos. But I think there's a much larger class of people, uh, in and around the studio that would have more interesting things to say. Duty, my advice is don't even try to do anything with the lawyers. I've never seen that. Never, ever, ever, ever seen that work. Because they just have a completely different incentive structure than you do, and they're not people that are playing the game. Their goal is to, like, minimize risk for their organization, and that's wikis are, I wouldn't say they're high risk, but they're not zero risk. They're something that is kinda, like, hard to understand if you aren't coming from it originally. So, you know, the the job of if you do your job right, the lawyer is there to sort of rubber stamp things at the end. Or if you're lucky, they just don't get involved at all. Okay, so that's kind of the high level point about game studios. I think we're probably going to have a lot more to talk about how to approach this in the discussion section at the end. But I really encourage you guys to realize that there are people that are shaped very similarly to you that will care about some of this stuff. And one other thing I'd add is I wrote about this a little bit in a blog, but game studios in general really do not like fandom. This is, I think, counterintuitive to a lot of people, but it's really not counterintuitive to me at all. Game studios are generally made up of people that, number one, use the wiki and know that it kind of is crap when it's on fandom. Number two, there's marketing people that are see all the ads being sort of shoved down everyone's throats as a significant brand risk, um, and is a major source of, if it's like a subscription game, for example, a major source of why people don't resubscribe. Whether this is actually true in reality, I can't really say for sure, but I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt that the marketing people get really freaked out about fandom. And I think fandom does a pretty good job trying to convince the wiki editors of, like, oh man, you know, we're a big company and this game studio, like Riot or Rockstar or whatever, they're a big company too. So we can talk to each other and that doesn't need to involve you. We can do all the hard work there. And it's just kind of it's it's kind of the exact opposite of how things actually work. Because in practice, th- any relationship that there is between fandom and that game studio is really arm's length, handled between people who have probably never heard or played the game on either side. And even when those relationships do exist, which I think they are embellished more so than they actually exist, even when they do exist, they are not happening at a level that gets you guys the things you actually want in order to make the wiki better. So that's, access to game data, old files, maybe some of the code, just access to, like, being able to ask questions about how things work. That is not a thing you're ever going to get from fandom, and it is very much a thing you can get from doing the legwork yourself and getting to know sort of the counterparts on the game studio side. So that's that. Um, One sort of just general rule, and this is true across the board, is you should probably be getting in everyone's DMs a bit more. I would say that, like, 80% of the good things that I've had happen in terms of, like, relationships that I've established are just because I do a lot of my good work in Discord DMs. Uh, this is something that I am slowly realizing not that many other people do to the same extent that I do, and I think I'm realizing that a lot of sort of this social credit, this network that I've built up is largely because of that trait. So I'm trying to encourage more of you guys to uh don't be afraid about contacting these people in private. I think there's always this concern about it's gonna go just, like, terribly, 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 or you're gonna get ignored or whatever, and that just, like, really doesn't happen very much in practice. I would say, like, 80 or 90% of the time, you actually get something really good out of it, and this is especially true, um, like, if you can get to a point where you have, you know, private messages with people at the game studios or people at, if you're trying to figure out, "Oh, man, can I get away with announcing this thing, on the subreddit, uh, for something related to the wiki? Can I get away with that?" I have every time that we have, like, forked a wiki or something, I've just encouraged the wiki admins to go and, like, find find one of the subreddit moderators on Discord or something, and this is almost always achievable, but something that people are really resistant to doing, and I've honestly never been able to figure out why, because it almost always works. Because I think it mostly comes down to wiki people not understanding that everyone really likes the wiki. They think that it's just equivalent to, "Oh, I have this new site that is maybe sketchy and weird, and I want to have it on Reddit," and it's really not like that at all. You're sort of just giving shape to a thing that people already use, already know exists, and it just gives more texture to it than it previously had. So you're actually all of us here are actually in a really privileged situation, um, in terms of being able to promote the thing that we want to do. And it's hard to understand how unusual that is unless you're outside of it. But all of you guys, because you are running a wiki and are kind of the holding together this thing that everyone else is using, you have social credit with essentially that entire community that you can use to take shortcuts that maybe wouldn't exist otherwise. Uh, and if you can just say, like, don't just say, "Hey, I wanted to ask you if I could post something about something." Just be like, "Hey, I run the way." Like, you're basically trying to convince whoever you're talking to, especially if it's like a Reddit or a Discord mod. You're all kind of like you're all kind of doing roughly the same thing and wearing different hats. And if you can just in the very first communication you have, uh, make it clear that this is what you're doing and this is why you're doing it. Um, I've really rarely seen that go badly. Well, let's talk about it more because some people have other opinions here. I think I would say a lot of it comes down to knowing what to say. Like I can imagine a variety of examples of these DMs that I've done where if I had done kind of a brutish job of it, then maybe it wouldn't have gone very well. Um, so last thing I want to say is just like, okay, what do you? I've been talking a lot about like establishing relationships with the game studios and the other power users, and it's like the relationship is I wouldn't quite call it a means to an end, but you're not doing it just to do it. You're doing it because you can get interesting things out of it that will make the wiki better. So it's not actually that uncommon if you have like a trusting enough relationship with the game developer for them to just send you a shit ton of code about how some specific thing works. So a specific example is also at RuneFest at a different RuneFest. Uh, so in RuneScape, you can kill monsters, and uh, the items that they drop will be sort of based on some some probability distribution that you don't have access to. So Nixer says, I just reversed the code. Can't do that. It's a black box. Cannot be done for this. Um, so you kind of have two options. You can either crowdsource it, which we've done at a pretty we have like probably like 50 terabytes of like crowdsourced monster monster data now. That's a whole different topic. But the other thing you can do is if you're friendly with the developers, that what you want to look for is things where it would take you like 2,000 hours to do something and it would take the developer like 1 hour. That is the class of things that you want to try and develop and get the people that actually, care about the wiki to be involved with this. And so this is something I did. This is 2018. I was just had this back and forth with one of the RuneScape developers. It's Mod Ash actually, if any of you know your JMods. Um and we just kind of went back and forth for like, 15 minutes trying to figure out, is there some way to get me most of what I want without a huge amount of effort outlay from from him or from someone else. And we kinda just negotiated back and forth, and he eventually just whispers to me, like, "What's your email?" And then the next morning, I had an email with, like, 12,000 lines of of RuneScape code that essentially solved the problem that I had. And this is something that is maybe the most dramatic example I have of this, but these sorts of things happen all the time, and I really encourage you guys, in addition to strategizing about how do you communicate with the game studio, I think it's also important to strategize about what do we actually want. What is the most useful if you're thinking about the ratio between the amount of time it would take you to do something versus the amount of time it would take the developer to help out, just really put a ton of thought into what is in that class of things. Because if you can go to the developer and say, "Hey, we want this thing. This is how we think, you could do it, and it would unlock this, and this, and this for us." That becomes actually like a pretty attractive proposition. If you can find one of those that is largely good for them as well as for you. And uh, honestly, I would maybe if any of you want homework, I would just like try and figure out what's on that list for you and your potential relationship with your game developer. What is the pie in the sky most ridiculous thing you could ask for? And the key, of course, is not to ask for all of it at once. The key is to find things that are at least as good for them as they are for you initially. But once you have that sort of relationship established that is based on trust, then you can start to do some of the uh, more significant things. And trust is a really big thing here because you have to understand that game developers are, or let's say game studios, are accustomed to being burned by the community. There's only so much that they can sort of offload to someone that is not them, that is not under some NDA, under some contract with the studio, just because there's all sorts of ways that things could potentially go a little bit badly. And your goal in establishing those relationships, and by the way, this has to be done at a person level, not at a company level, because companies can't trust people. People can trust people. Your goal is to get enough notches in your belt with them that give you sort of the ability to do things that are wider and wider in scope than previously would be possible. So, for example, this thing where Mod Ash sends me, 12,000 lines of code, that only worked because we had very slightly worked together on some previous thing, and that was in 2018 or 19. And because we've stacked up all these other wins with Jagex since then, it's become easier and easier to do all sorts of other things. And this is not something that is unique to RuneScape by any means. There's sort of similar, le- less extreme versions of this that we've had good things happen with for like League, Vampire Survivors, Warframe, ton of stuff for Subnautica that just came out, and it really just is about, can you get to a point where they see you guys as uh, just like a resource that is very willing to work towards their goals if those goals are aligned with the things that you want. The more you can do that, the more you can kind of I the last bullet point here is like just kind of one-off web dev things that are easier for you than they are for the game studios. That this is actually a very large class of things, believe it or not, where game studios generally can't move very fast on the infrastructure side. They have, they'll have a web team, they'll have other people around them, but if there's a question of like, oh, could we build this thing, or could the wiki do it for some reason or another? In a lot of cases it's probably going to be 10 times less work for the wiki to do it than it is for uh for the developers. And this is something I think you would all do well to kind of understand. There's the speed at which something can get done is pretty much unrelated to how many resources the group has. There's a this is a bit of an analogy here, but in the aftermath of this Wikimedia hackathon that a bunch of the Weird Loop people went to in the beginning of May, there was some discussion of like, oh, could we do research? Like, could we collaborate on sort of the new editor pipeline? Can we figure out kind of how this works and what sort of adjustments we could make that would get more people editing? And the feedback I got from a lot of people was, why why are we doing this? Why isn't the Wikimedia Foundation doing this? They have, their budget is like 300 times bigger than ours, and they have more people, and they have blah 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 blah. And this is all true, but there is an agility that comes with being small and not having massive production systems to maintain, uh, that allows you to make really good decisions for this specific project, that the that make it just like feasible for you guys to handle, where the dev couldn't, or maybe they could make it initially but like maintaining it would be infeasible. uh and it's this great kind of, normally they would think their only options are, okay, we have to build this ourselves in house and it's going to cost like $300,000, or some random person in the community is going to do it. And neither of those options are good. The random person in the community is like, it's not great because you just, I don't know, it creates risks, it creates a thing that they don't control. And I know people are always worried about, if I talk to the developer, they're going to want to like start censoring me or controlling the things that we do. And this is something that every wiki that we've ever worked with, I mean, including like RuneScape, us originally, we were very worried about this. And I have to say, honestly, this has just not really been a thing that has happened. It feels like a very quaint concern. I think the developers do have a certain sense in which they want control, but it's more in the form of, okay, if we have this calculator that is super important and is linked from the main page, it's important that it doesn't turn into like a bunch of like, it doesn't turn into like a porn site or something. Like that's the level of bad that they're trying to avoid. It's not like, oh, we don't want coverage of this concerning thing that happened in the game or something. It's really just like the most basic, like, are we sending people off to something that we can't turn off if there's a problem? And it turns out being the wiki is this wonderful third option that people don't really realize exists, but it absolutely does, where a lot of the work is offloaded to people who can both do it faster, know the game in and out, from the perspective of a game studio's web team. The web team probably doesn't play the game. Like they might, but there's no guarantee, and there's certainly no guarantee that they have all of the relevant context that you guys all do about both like specifics of the game and also, okay, if we make this, this is how people are going to use it. So in that sense, the wiki is better for a lot of this stuff, but it's also like it's in a position of not quite being stupid players either. It's to a point where, if this tool requires some collaboration with the game developer, it requires some data or some code or some clarifications, they will feel more comfortable doing that than would otherwise be the case. Another example is I'm going to get some of the details wrong on this, but League of Legends had a bunch of mini games. Can I show? Does anyone have a link to one of those? Take a second. I think I'm basically done with the present. Uh, it's things that are like rehosted on the wiki. That's the part that makes them interesting. Okay. Yeah, let's pull this up. Yeah, so that's basically the overall presentation. But just think a lot about what you can make happen. I'm going to pull this up because this is a great example of it not being on here. You guys see this? Yeah. Okay, so there was these mini games in the League client that Riot, for whatever reason, didn't want to keep supporting long term. And I'm sure on their side, they're like, oh God, if we stop supporting it, then people are going to get mad. And like, is there some other path out of here that where they can still handle it while we can keep kind of a clean sheet of stuff? So the solution was actually just to get them on the wiki. And this was not the most straightforward technical project. It was mostly done by someone who was not explicitly like the most like wiki nerdy person, but they're sort of again in that category of um, power user where the wiki can be a really good platform for some of the things that they want to do. So literally, this is just embedded in in the wiki right now. It's doing some transpilation from something to another, and it's on some CDN somewhere, and taking a while to load. Here we go.
And so, expect not the petal to float alone across the meadow, for we must be the wind that carries it.
But does the wind not also... What was that?
I feel like this maybe something about like
Perhaps.
you can even full screen it. I think this is struggling to work like with my recording also happening. I'm not really sure what that's about. But anyway, this is something where it's just there is a very large class of things where the wiki is actually better positioned to do something that is useful for the players than the developers are. And often the best way to do this requires some amount of coordination with the developers. And the more you can just kind of stack up things like that work well, it's just like the sky's the limit, honestly. And you just need to realize that there are many things that you're better positioned to do than they are. And so that's I guess my homework for you guys is think about what would be in this category for you because it's going to be a very different set of things for you than it would be for me, but I guarantee that that set of things exists. And once you start thinking about it, once you start, go discuss this with your editors too, with your own discords. Like try and figure out what is in that category, because once you figure that out, it might turn out that like one or two of them are actually like really fucking good ideas and maybe the basis for establishing more of a relationship with the developers. Okay, that's about all I have on this topic. I am more than happy to keep yapping because I think this is an area where there, as I said earlier, there isn't a one size fits all approach to interacting with game studios. It really depends a lot on what their existing posture is and kind of being reactive to that. So that's that. Any questions? Any thoughts? Any hands? Kai asked for some advice for reaching very large game studios like Valve. So I think I can't remember who I was talking to about this, but I think you're, and this is, I think, pretty good general advice is find the other people in the community that do have those relationships um, already. And so I know there's the it's like the Valve Wiki network, and I know you technically can't be on that because the game isn't out yet. But I think what you should be aiming for is not like I want to be a credentialed member of this sort of group, because honestly, to be honest, I find all of these like wiki networks that are like very explicit about like membership requirements. I find all of that a little bit silly. I think they are valuable, but they're valuable because of the informal connections, because of that is a place where, Kai, you or Dusk or someone can go and just be like, okay, what is your history of like interacting with Valve? Is it through like one is VWN something where it's like one community member, or excuse me, one community manager somewhere, and this is like 5% of what they do? Are they contactable? Are they, what is the nature of that? Look around more and more to what kind of exists in I don't know if you really want to get into the Steam community side of it, but for any of these games, find the people that are operating the closest to how you want to operate, and just kind of go to them for advice and soak up as much as you can, just like as a sponge. And this is, I mean, honestly, I wish more people in the RuneScape community did this for us, because I think it's very clearly the case that we are the RuneScape wiki is the community project that has the deepest relationship with Jagex at this point. Like I got my fingers in so many ridiculous little things that that Jagex is doing, and honestly, if I was, I don't know, running some alternative website or like some sort of possibly sketchy, possibly useful server for RuneScape, and I was trying to establish a relationship with Jagex, the smart thing to do would actually be to go through the wiki, to go through me. And I think what you should do is figure out the people that kind of look like me in in the larger like Valve gaming community. I would not recommend emailing Gabe. This is kind of the classic like top down thing that, and maybe Valve is just completely different. I know Gabe is classically his own person. Um but yeah, I think you're going to be better off finding a single person. Do people get responses from him consistently? Interesting. That's fun. Well, there's worse ideas. I think I told you I used to live next to the general counsel for Valve, and, kinda wish I got to know him a little bit better because actually, I don't think he's there anymore, but yeah, I think my first protocol, if I were you, is talk to not necessarily like the Valve Wiki network as a thing, but talk to the relevant people within it. Like establish there's even if, the network says you can't join unless you're, y- you know, in some specific state, um, that doesn't mean you can't go talk to like the TF2 wiki people or whoever and just kind of gain as much information as you can from that. Is that actually true or is that just a concern? I know that I thought Valve really. Wait, sorry, Valve pays the costs? I mean, it sounds like there's still someone there that like it's going into some cost center somewhere. So it's I would say it's worth finding out. Like there's still some relationship there. It's worth finding out what the nature of it is. Kepler asks, "What are your thoughts when you initially reached out to Jagex for the first time in terms of getting game mechanics to publish to the wiki or in general?" I don't know. I mean, that wasn't a really a one-time thing. It was a long-term build up over time. Uh, that I mean, if I could probably talk for like 2 hours about sort of the nature of how that Jagex relationship has changed over time. Uh, the way it worked very, very originally, and this is before we were even this is when we were still on fandom. The way it originally worked was we had gotten to know a single community manager for RuneScape pretty well. Mod Shawnee, actually, if you know him. And he was, very junior at the time, but was kind of the conduit through which all of the wiki related stuff happened. And it was not in any official capacity. It was just he saw the value and he wanted to help. So he, he'd come to us and be like, "Okay, what do you want to know?" And we'd give him some things, and then he'd sometimes be able to figure out what the deal is, sometimes wouldn't. Um, we worked together on the perk calculator, if you're familiar with that. That was honestly quite a challenging thing because it was a lot of very specific like implementation details of how this thing worked. I'm not sure I would do anything I don't know if I could do anything differently, honestly. Like I think we played it about as well as we could have. I think uh there became a point where kind of the original rule of like let's go bottom up instead of top down, that kind of stopped working. Or I shouldn't say stopped working, but instead of it just being like, okay, we need to be friends with like one game designer or one community manager or something like that. Uh we I think in the last year and a half or so gained the ability to do things more top down. I think just because the people it's kind of a mix of factors. One is there's new leadership at Jagex as of about a year and a half ago. Uh, that is, I think they take the people that we are friends with a lot more seriously. So like, Lenny and Ramen and Maud Ryan and all these guys are kind of people that we knew 5 years ago or something and are now kind of more and more influential. So that means and have high opinions of us as well. So that means the when it's time to actually have some like interesting conversation about I'll give you an example. Like the plugin API is something that maybe you wouldn't think is directly wiki related, but it is kind of pretty directly in our wheelhouse. For context, everybody, RuneScape has a third party client that has a really good plugin API, and they're trying to the RuneScape developers trying to make their own client with a good plugin API that will let people develop whatever stuff they want to do, kind of as a uh, just as a competitive thing, really. Um, and I have managed to sort of position myself as like the nerd whisperer for that project, just because they tried to do something like that for old school and it didn't really work. And the whole point is how do you get people to want to contribute to something like this? How do you get, especially it's usually a specific class of people that are usually like professional programmers in their real job, and they do this as a hobby, and they're just, very good, but also maybe not the most socially aware themselves. And like how do you get those two groups to talk to each other in a way that makes sense and actually gets something good made out of it? And that is an area where I think, because we have a good enough reputation for having done all the wiki stuff really well, uh, they they put a lot of faith in sort of my interpretation of these larger questions that they're trying to answer now. So at this point, like, we don't need to go bottom up, because I can literally just like, I don't know, have a meeting with like the Jagex CEO, and it'll be about like plugin stuff, and it'll be useful for them. So that's I think an important thing to understand is like it's not a parasitic relationship. And I think the more you can do to find things that are mutually beneficial, the easier time so I mean, you say here, like, I want the mods to mention in one of their modcasts to refer to the wiki. I would not prioritize that, honestly. Like, I would find other things to prioritize that would actually be, like, explicitly more useful and, like, more valuable for the wiki, and maybe more valuable for them. But that's, like, requires you to do some homework to figure out what those things are. And it could also be areas where I don't imagine they have, I mean, well, put it this way. So Dragon Wilds, it's coming to console and like a full release in like 3 months, right? Something like that. I'm gonna assume that's right, because I think that's right. Um, that means there is a ton of interest in developing uh, materials and marketing and whatever else that would be good for that launch. This is sort of your moment to come in and shine, and actually, and I can probably make some more introductions for you than I've done so far. 'Cause they're definitely like, this is the closest thing Jagex has had to like a game launch of any meaningful repute ever, really. So this is something they're probably gonna go spend like $3 million or something on marketing, and they're gonna put a lot of effort into trying to polish things up as well as they possibly can. So you have this period of time to try and make that as good as it can be. Um, but you need to figure out just what that looks like for you. And I think once you have an idea of what are the most useful things, Like, if you could wave a magic wand, what do you want from Jagex? Because I think you can do a lot better than having them mention the wiki. You wanna be looking for things that make the wiki notably better or, make the yeah, let's talk afterwards because there's a few interesting things there. Haiju Elf King says, "What do you do if there's no CMs and you're trying to reach someone this is presumably at Paramount, right?" Yeah, it's it seems like kinda hard mode, I'm not gonna lie, like, it's an unusually difficult situation, especially because Paramount itself is going through all sorts of, you know, growing pains, I guess, if you wanna be, like, politically correct about it. Uh, I think something I found useful is trying to map out so I would say 2 things. One is try and find anyone else. It's kind of the same advice I gave to Kai. Try and find anyone else where if you squint a little bit, they're in a similar situation that you are. And that may be difficult. And I think it's unfortunate because, like in your case, the most similar situation probably is that official South Park Discord that you guys are already I assume, I can't remember what ended up happening there, but, I think you're currently running that. So, eh, I I think, like, if I was gonna try and if I was you and I was trying to solve this, I would try and make a list of, like, 5 or 10 community things that are, like, vaguely the same shape as what you're doing. And so that can include I mean, are there other official Discords or, like, any other, like, official sites and things. I know like there is like a cc.com South Park wiki, and that's kind of a complete disaster in its own terms. Um, I think once you have that list, and it shouldn't just be South Park, it should be like whatever else, does oh boy, does is the community presence that South Park has in terms of like their involvement in having an official Discord and you know a wiki on cc.com, are those unique to South Park or do they also do that for other shows or movies or anything like that? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if you do, but if I were you, I would definitely try and figure that out and kind of just get into contact with everyone that is running something that looks vaguely the same shape as you. I would say it's gonna often be the case that at least one of them is gonna have something interesting to say, and you really don't know until you try. But literally, just like one tiny little nugget of information is often it often makes the entire thing worth pursuing. If that doesn't get you anywhere, usually the next step I would say is kinda like try and map the org chart a little bit. Um, figure out which people, at least on paper, seem like they would be in charge of this sort of thing. They are probably all on LinkedIn. I LinkedIn for me is very much like a last resort as a way of communicating, but it does work some of the time. So, yeah, I mean, honestly, just in general, the advice of like find the things that are shaped similarly to you and figure out what they're doing and what relationships they have. That I think is a really, really underrated technique. And yeah, you might get a few of them to tell you to fuck off, but like most of them will actually be pretty helpful, I think. I mean, sure. I mean, it's there's a reason I said it's a last resort, but if these people aren't on Discord or Reddit, then it's not really a choice. Right? You're gonna get worse engagement, but some of that is just the people there generally care a little bit less about what they're doing. Twitter, yeah, Twitter works. If you can contact them, sure. I mean, if you're I think in general for this sort of thing, you should be willing to put out a bunch of feelers with the idea that like 80% of them will not get a response, but that 20% has a very high probability of making a really big difference for what you're doing. Anything else? Any thinkies? Any opinions? I know some people were saying earlier that they don't like the idea of just like DMing people, but I don't know. I've really never had it go poorly, even in environments that I don't have. You might say, oh, maybe it only works for you because you're in charge of RuneScape Wiki or something. Even in environments where that's not a factor at all, I still think it's I mean, honestly, it still comes down to empathy. If someone messages you and is asking for a bunch of things and not really giving anything in return, yeah, it's quite possible you're gonna get like a moody response. But if you look at it from the perspective of what would actually be good for them in some sense, if you're like, humble about it, like especially if for like what Kai, what you would maybe be doing for TF2, or I think Dustfire was also looking at this. Like people people usually respond well to someone who is well-meaning and aware that they don't know everything. So, like if you're coming in and saying like, "Hey, what is the deal with TF2? Blah 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 blah. I run this. Um, do you actually have contact with them? Like, is there someone on the wiki admin side that is more involved with that, et cetera, et cetera?" Like, it's hard to construct a scenario where someone would be, like, super pissed off about that, I think. Like, it's possible they won't be the right person to talk to about it, and this is something worth understanding as well, is, um, you I I think a lot of people are not very good at understanding when they don't know something. So, you can end up in a I've had this happen a couple times actually where we were, like, looking at forking we wanted to, like, maybe fork a wiki, and we ended up talking to someone who had, like, a negative or sort of, like, ignorant response where, of course, we thought that this was sorta indicative of how the entire community felt, and it turns out this person that we talked to was actually just, like, not that important or relevant, and once we talked to the wider group, like, significantly later, it was just like we talked to the wrong person. So one of the important questions to ask is not just like, how does this work? It's more, who here knows how this works, right? I think people are much more willing to answer that second question honestly than the first one if they don't know how it works. Anything else? Any other questions? No? All right. Well, I guess here's what I'd say. If you come back and you have thoughts or ideas about working with your game studios, um, and you want some advice on maybe the feasibility of the things you want to do, or you want some advice on how to reach out to them, I'm always down for that. You can just message me here or in private. It's kind of actually no, I'm going to force you to do it in private, so you all have to learn how to send a cold call DM. Okay. Um, Yeah, this was Yap number 3. Yap number 4, I think we're gonna do next Sunday, and it's gonna be about, uh I think I'm gonna reorder this a little bit. I'm gonna have this one be about MediaWiki performance optimization, which is gonna be a fun topic for a lot of people. So that's yeah, that's Yap number 3 in the books. Come talk to me if you want any advice, anything. See, how do I close this? End stage for everyone. There we go. Peace out.